Despite President Biden's declaration that the war is over in Afghanistan, and it is most certainly not, and despite his claim that the extraction of civilians and Afghan allies was a huge success, all evidence is to the contrary. It's been nothing short of a deadly debacle, underplanned, undermanned, under-resourced, and hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans and, of course, Afghans were left stranded. Even the translator that once saved Joe Biden's life has been left behind to meet his fate at the hands of the Taliban. A strategic and foreign policy blunder writ large. Canada's response, too, has been shameful. Too little, too late. Slow, bureaucratic, risk-averse, and dependent, as we often are, on the kindness of our NATO allies. So, to put it kind of bluntly, how the hell did this happen? We're going to talk to someone that I truly respect, worked with. We shared an anchor desk at one point, Kevin Newman, a journalist that has worked in Canada, in the United States for ABC. He's traveled to war zones, and he has been working this time around with the Veterans Transition Network, writing some incredible material about what's been really going on, but also actively working to try and bring our Afghan allies out. Kevin, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Pam.
You were sitting there in the middle of the woods somewhere, and I'm in the middle of the lake in Saskatchewan. So
yeah, aren't we fortunate? But yeah, it's a little place to decompress. So very different from what's been filling my head the last couple of weeks.
It's for those who haven't been able to find the articles, please check it out on the line. I think it's on Substack. Is that right?
Yeah, Jen Gerson, who I helped sort of flower into a national voice when I was at CTV. She was one of the columnists on the show that I had. She now runs a really interesting site for really sharp opinion, not terribly partisan, but people who know stuff, and I enjoy writing for her.
Okay, so you do know stuff, and there's a couple of stories by way of example that I want you to explain to our viewers and listeners so that they get what's going on. One is the story of Abdul, and the other is the story of the gas station. So start with Abdul.
So Abdul, it turns out, was once a translator for the chief of the defense staff. And is one of many, many stories that this volunteer network has been watching and communicating with over the past couple of weeks, mostly through WhatsApp. And it's incredibly sad. He was in Kandahar, and Kandahar, as you know, Pam, is where most of our forces spent much of the war. We had about 1,000 people that we were watching in Kandahar, trying to get them through the immigration process that had been set up by the government, and ran out of time in Kandahar. The Taliban arrived, started to cut off service, so he moved up to one of the safe houses that this volunteer group of Canadians has put together and financed. There's a bunch of them around Kabul, and he's been there now for a month, and it was one of those people who was in that melee at the airport in Kabul before the bombs went off. Mm-hmm. And he was, his brother had made it over before. Yeah. He had made it before to Canada as well under the old program that ended in 2016. So, but he had never allowed to bring his family. He was never allowed to bring his wife, his children. So he was trying to bring his family back when the Taliban rout began, and he got trapped there. And what ended up happening, and this happened to many, many people, was the immigration ministry in Canada would accept applications for whole families, so lists of names, usually between 5 or 6 names, sometimes larger. But they approved them piecemeal, bit by bit. So he was at the airport, and then faced the Canadian immigration official that was there, and they said, "Well, you can come, your wife can come, your child can come, your sister can't come." And his sister was breastfeeding a child in the melee there, and had 2 children of her own. So she got on the plane, had to leave her 2 children behind with her husband, and the families were separated. And so there were many, many cases of families going through piecemeal. Some made it out, some did not. Just a terrible Sophie's choice that they had at the airport. Do you wait for the paperwork to complete as a family, or do you take the last, what you thought was and turned out was the last chance to get out? And he did, but he's not happy with who he had to leave behind.
This is the thing that I think that ordinary people are just finding so puzzling, which is all these promises, and we hear it here and we hear it in the US. No man will be left behind, no person will be left behind. Hundreds and thousands of people are being left behind.
And they are the people, Pam, who are usually at the back of the bus. We did bring some people out. We brought Canadian citizens out. We brought some permanent residents, people with Canadian passports. They were easy to get out because they had Canadian passports. Mm-hmm. Nobody could stop them for that. But the Afghans who went through the special immigration process that was only established about 5 weeks ago, very few of them got out. They're mostly all still there. And there seemed to be sort of a 4-star approach to some people getting out, and then these people have been left there. And even when I listen to the Foreign Affairs Minister now in the briefings, they're talking about the 1,250 Canadian passport holders that they weren't able to get out in time. Well, there's about 5,600 people in that immigration paperwork pipeline. We think maybe a couple of hundred of those got out, maybe 14%, but that's 85% that have still been left in Kabul, and in a situation which is getting more dangerous by the day now that there are no foreign forces there.
It's quite extraordinary when we think, and you and I have both seen things on the ground in Afghanistan, but why we would give up the Bagram airfield where we could have controlled that and got people there is shocking.
Well, that seemed to surprise everybody. I mean, I remember that was when for me, Pam, it went, oh, they've left so soon. Like everyone had this sort of 31st of August, and then the American military just announced one day, even the Afghan government said it was surprised by this, that, hey, we're out. And that was, frankly, the signal to the Taliban that it had some time to continue on its plan. I mean, this was the strangest thing I've ever seen. There was a peace deal signed between former U.S. President Trump and the Taliban to give them a year to withdraw American forces. He basically circled a date on a calendar, and then Biden continued it. And then they pulled out like a good 6 weeks before they said was the deadline. And that just created a massive vacuum. And so the Taliban moved in quickly, knowing that the ability of the American forces had been reduced. We saw towards the end, they had to pour 8,000 people back in.
Exactly.
So it's very, very, I've never seen anything, except perhaps the aftermath of the fall of Iraq, where there had been so little thought and planning into what comes next.
This is what's so shocking, is that when you know that there's a deadline. Certainly when I was on the Afghan committee, the Canadian committee, to decide our role in Afghanistan, the one thing we said is you can't ever leave and put a fixed date unless you have all your ducks in a row. We had no ducks in a row, none.
No, and they, when the Bagram base was abandoned by the Americans so quickly, it didn't take anybody who had been in Afghanistan or who knew people a second to go, oh, there's the protection that has kept them from being targets of the Taliban for so long. Canada left in 2014. We haven't been that protection, but the Americans have. And sure. It was stunning at that point, and it wasn't hard. And it shouldn't have really been hard for anyone to go, oh, we got to get going, because this is not going to end well.
There's also reporting over the last couple of days that the Taliban actually said, look, to the Americans, you can keep control of Kabul while you get everybody out. We'll stay on the edges. And they said, no, thanks. We'll just take the airport. We can manage. This is insanity.
Yeah, well, trying to figure out which Taliban is in charge.
Yes,
is an interesting question, because we tend to think of it as the Taliban.
Yeah,
there's 38 different tribes, and the one that seems to be operating and have control in Kabul has shown some restraint so far. From what we hear that's happening in Kandahar, that section of the Taliban has not been kind, and we are getting reports of people who have been killed with an association with Canada. So yes, they've been taking frankly, I think a page out of, if you remember back, Pam, when Iran fell to the Islamists, and they allowed a period where they were saying good things, and they allowed Westerners to leave. They didn't allow many of their own people, and then once the Westerners leave, then the oppression began.
Yeah.
So we'll see what the days ahead bring. This is now fully in Taliban control. There is no counterbalancing force there now, other than we're getting some reports of people trying to Afghan militias trying to fight the Taliban and places outside. Yeah.
No, that this is the problem, and anybody who thinks the Taliban of any version is going to change its spots is wrong. And women and children, and that's the other thing. We have left the most vulnerable behind. We're not even sure who is coming out, who the Americans took out, whether, if I can put it this way, it's the right Afghans. Are we at least getting our allies, the people that put their lives on the line for us, at the front of the line?
Yeah, no, we haven't. Frankly, they have been at the back of the immigration line. And early on in this, there was this group of us, myself, 3 retired generals who commanded the forces in Afghanistan, and some pretty good high operating soldiers who want to remain in the background. What we proposed at the beginning was, you don't need a complicated process. There is a loyalty test. And there are Canadians who are willing to put their hands up and say, that was my guy, here's the proof. Can I help you move this through the process? Because, this isn't someone, these weren't people who were strangers to us. These were people who were well known, and many friendships across the country in the military, in journalism, in the aid processes. But, quite frankly, there was a group that turned over about 300 files that they had built up called the Afghan Canadian Interpreters Association. They'd done all the work. And they've handed it over to the immigration ministry and said, here, you don't need to start from scratch. We've done the work, please use it. And that's the last, frankly, we heard from them for a long time. And they started to start over. Instead of in my view, they could have had a head start with all the work that was being done by volunteers already.
And we're also told that those that were granted the special immigration visas, the SI visas, they call them, that when the embassy started to shut down, they shredded all the documents. So if they were in process, it was shredded.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but what I can say is that the day the Taliban was rolling in, Canada withdrew its ambassador, it withdrew all of its embassy staff, it withdrew its military attachés. We were unique in that. Every other country kept a small group there. And it turned out that was really important, because that following week and a half was when negotiations started with the Taliban, negotiations with the Americans. We had no eyes and we had no boots on the ground for a critical week, which was the week that the rescue was being set up. So by the time we went back in with a small force of the military, there was no groundwork that had been done. We were developing relationships very late in the process, and so Canada, frankly, got kicked to the end of the process because we weren't there initially to be in on it. And I think that cost that cost us time, and it cost us the ability to rescue these people.
Yeah, and it will cost them their lives in many cases. So just, I want to come back to the gas station story, because it's so emblematic of so many things that went wrong. But the Trudeau government, and this again, I'm trying not to be partisan here, canceled the special immigration stream that was created under the Harper government, created a different system. But we're talking since 2016. I know, that soldiers are special forces people, our pilots, they have all come back and asked the government, as you've said, to help. Let's get this process kickstarted. Let's not wait till the last 15 minutes on Earth. We've had years to actually do this, not just months, not just days, not just hours.
Yeah, Canada, this hasn't been our finest hour. Right from the very beginning, it took a fair bit of lobbying for the then Harper government to create a program. They brought over 800 interpreters, but they couldn't bring their families, so they were separated, which was hard. And then there was nobody for many, many years. And the Trudeau government did mothball it in 2016. So initially, when we were advocating, what they were saying was, well, they can come through the normal immigration stream, they can apply to be refugees, but Pam, that takes months. It takes lots of money with lawyers. wasn't practical for these people. And so they did finally create a stream. And then, as you know, as I reported and others have as well, it quickly became bogged down in a degree of paperwork that, because it was all driven from Ottawa, it couldn't be driven from Kabul anymore. Frankly, had a level of absurdity to it. They were pulling people into the open to get biometric thumbs, even though they were in hiding, and the Taliban knew exactly where the Canadian embassy was. So it was. I think overall, and you've covered the Ottawa scene and been part of it a lot longer than I have, but they didn't create a task force to coordinate government response. So they had the Immigration Ministry, they had the Defense Department, and they had Global Affairs, and they weren't talking to each other. Right. So what happened at the gas station was the Immigration Ministry sent out texts to 10 families, and that ended up being about 100 people that said, quickly, go to the airport, your flight's here. So they get out of the safe houses that the Canadian public has fundraised for. They make their way,
like you have created, not the government.
Well, others, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they get out of the safe houses. They have to walk because there is no transportation provided by the Canadian government, and many other countries did provide it so that they wouldn't have to walk through Taliban checkpoints with targets on their backs. But they did. They got through. They were beaten. The Taliban did not, to our knowledge, kill anybody, but they did beat them. And then they got to this gas station area where they were told to wear red and wait for someone to come. And after 40 hours being in the open sun under a gas bar, these families, these children, women, elderly, nobody ever came. Nobody even gave them a bottle of water. We did finally. We arranged for some water to be delivered. But for 40 hours, they waited about 100 meters from the gate that they were told to go to, and they heard nothing. And nobody came out. There were a small group at that time of Canadian soldiers and some civil servants. I don't know what they were doing. They were behind the wire. Right. But finally, at that point in the event, we didn't know what else to tell. I mean, we were worried about a humanitarian crisis because children were getting quite ill, and so they went back to their house and waited to hear that again. And we had a couple of incidents of that where people were being sent to airport for a jet that wasn't there and a process that wasn't ready,
and then go to a hotel or, as you say, wear red or do this. Or at one point, we even announced that there'd be a new text line in Ottawa that these folks should just call directly to Ottawa.
Yeah, and we tried it. There was somebody who answered the phone finally, and that was after a little bit, who basically sent people to a website. So they got to talk to a human being. That was an improvement, but they didn't get, throughout this whole process, and even to this day, Pam, they still don't get any indication of whether they've been approved to come to Canada. The first indication they got was the text that said, go to the airport now.
I think what really burns too is, I mean, we watch the French. Most countries have these C-17s, the big Globemasters. You can put an entire town in there if you choose to. They brought buses. The French use those buses to go and pick people up, to break through the gates and get them onto planes. This daring raid by the Ukrainians the other day that scooped up a bunch of people and just got them on a plane and pointed the guns back at the Taliban and said, I dare you. Like, the Americans that were left on the ground, I know, broke protocol and chain of command and helped people to do this. And I just feel like here we are once again on the international stage, dependent on the kindness of strangers. Could we put some of our people on your plane? Could you help us out here? Because we have not stood up.
Yeah, that was definitely the relationship they tried to embed with the American military, which, as you know, is typical of what the Canadian military sees as the best route. Some of the information
mostly
we got,
because we sent them in there ill-equipped and
we were not a large force. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And then the cooperation with the Americans seemed to break down. The gate that we were at, they sealed. They turned it into a gate to bring in other people, and so then we started to cozy up to the Brits, and the Brits helped us for a little bit, but then they had to take care of their own people. So it's hard, when, good soldiers arrive and want to get the right things done. It's hard when there's very few of you and there's these large militaries that are already in full gear and executing.
I was just reading last night about the Pineapple Express, as it's
Uh,
called, the special ops vets US who basically just did that. They went in,
right.
I mean, they were coordinating from the US, but they made it happen. They found secret gate at the airport. They used code words for these people, not like standing up and can we take a biometric thumbprint, as you say, but protected them.
Yeah, that was pretty audacious.
Yeah,
We were a small group of maybe 12 people,
yeah,
so there were no missions likely from us, and we didn't have the ability to get lift
yeah,
and veterans in the U.S. had been advocating in the same way that veterans in Canada had for a very long time,
yeah,
and had very similar frustrations trying to deal with a bureaucracy that didn't seem to be responding with the proper level of alert. I think there was an understanding that these people were in trouble. I don't know that anybody ever acted as if these people could be dead,
yeah.
and that was the thing that was really frustrating. Is just to understand that this was so extraordinary. I can't remember in my lifetime a situation where we were trying to pump people through an incredibly difficult process, knowing as we did that they were known to the Taliban and could very well pay for their association with Canada with their lives.
This is what, of course, troubles everyone now, that there is no exit point. I mean, to tell people to go to Pakistan, you'd have to go over a set of mountains for starters. Those kinds of issues to just, if you can get somehow to a third country, we'll have your back. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, it's tough. And there are so many scam artists that have come now. There's
Yeah,
people that we know of that are saying, for $1,500 we'll get you to Pakistan, and they never get there. They just take the money. There's
yeah,
there's now info war stuff starting. Things that look like they're coming from the government of Canada but aren't. Somebody's trying to corral them in certain places, which is dangerous thing. So these
yeah.
poor people are left without any way to leave. They've got criminal elements. They know that the Taliban, in some cases, knows who they are, and it's heartbreaking to still be in touch with them.
This is, for all intents and purposes, a surrender. I don't know how else to describe it. The Taliban, in all its many forms, is now one of the some of the most sophisticated military equipment of any military in the region. I think it's $90 billion worth of helicopters
A whole
and
lot of planes. Now they probably won't be able to maintain them for long because they don't have the infrastructure for that. But yeah, and they've been backed, of course, by the elements of the Pakistan military as
yeah.
well. So, these are not, they're not like ISIS in that they're sort of roving bands. They're much more sophisticated and I mean, look at what they were able to do in a matter of 10 days.
Yeah. So the notion and the promise that we heard again from the president that, any American that wants to come out, we'll get you out. I just don't know how.
The Americans might have the capacity. They may be. I mean, they have been negotiating with the Taliban throughout this. I don't know that the Canadian government has. The
Right.
Canadian government's position has been that they are listed as a terrorist organization. They should not be negotiated with. However, they are now the government of Taliban. There are still
Afghanistan.
1,200 Canadian passport holders there, and 5,000 people who are in the immigration stream. If the CIA was talking to the Taliban, elements of the U.S. military have been talking to the Taliban. It seems like they're the only game in town to be able to do anything at this point.
So do you think what we will see is these clandestine operations done by volunteers and military veterans who have ways and means of getting modes of transportation accessible?
Maybe. I don't know of any Canadian operations like that.
Yeah,
You
I'm
know,
not.
no. I mean, there's a mercenary class in that part of the world of former special forces people that have left the military and are muscle for hire.
Yeah.
It's possible some of that will be used. What we don't know yet is what form the Taliban government will take, whether the reprisals will start. It's still an incredibly dangerous situation there.
We talked with Major General Dennis Thompson. I know that he's part of the group trying to make things happen. He was most concerned about how bureaucratic we seem to be in this country in the face of crisis. We want people to fill out their forms. We want to make sure nobody extras on the plane if they don't have a seat belt. When the option is staying in Afghanistan and having your head cut off, a seat belt seems like kind of a minimal thing. Do you see that as the larger problem, or is it a question of political will, or all of the above?
Probably all of the above. I mean, I think um, it was surprising to me. And Pam, I've covered Parliament Hill for 3 different networks various times.
Yeah.
Aware of the way it works. It seemed to me that the alarm bells were not going off.
Yeah.
And anywhere. And that there just seemed to be that was a long time ago kind of feeling to it, and no sense of urgency. I don't know why that is. Maybe the fact that nobody's had proximity, maybe that's one of the things that being in an office together might have created better alarm bells, that somebody
and
would
the conversations, for sure.
Conversations might have happened. Nevertheless, it wasn't hard to see, because honestly, every other country had a program in place to rapidly process and extract. Not many countries did well with it. Australia didn't, UK didn't, US didn't, but we didn't have a program till the very end of this. We were the last ones to create an immigration path. So we compressed the timeline anyway. And then into that timeline, we just couldn't seem to get people to look at a process that was substantially different from any other normalized refugee process. We couldn't succeed in saying these are extraordinary circumstances. You have people who will vouch for these people. You have employment records for these people. They work for you. That kind of stuff.
They were on the payroll. Yeah,
they were on your payroll. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Afghans that have come, we just don't know, whether we're pretty certain it's not all those folks that we have taken in refugees, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah. And, I will say the government, you have to really dig through the context on the numbers.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion of 20,000 refugees. And I think people might have assumed this is great. We're taking 20,000 people out of Afghanistan right now. That's not what that program is.
No.
The program is for people who have already left Afghanistan several months ago or in refugee camps in Tajikistan and Turkey.
Exactly. It is not 20,000 today. Yeah.
It's not 20,000 of these people who have targets on their back. And, the government's own numbers say that there's about 1,000 Afghans that they have repatriated. But how many of those are people who were in Afghanistan, and how many Afghans were in the other areas? They're not breaking that down. So, this 3,700 number that's put out, it's not clear. It says that they were 3,700 included people they facilitated transport for, and then they don't tell us what that definition is. Facilitation of transport, is that transport, or is that sending an email to go to transport? I don't know.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say it's like a lot of the communications around this has been vague, and I think intended to provide a picture that is perhaps shows a better outcome than in fact exists.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the middle of an election, so we understand the government doesn't want any hard truths here. It will not help their cause. And even the Pentagon spokesman in the U.S. kind of talking about, well, we always have Americans in foreign countries that need help and we get them out. I mean, these are not people whose planes got canceled after their 2-week stay in Cancun, right?
No, they are people that left it too late. And
system, yeah.
I mean, history is filled with, I often ask myself, and I'm sure you have too, like, what if that was me? How easily would I give up my house? How easily would I say goodbye to my family? How easily would I run out of the country knowing that I was leaving all this behind? So some of these people left it too late. It's true the Taliban took over more quickly, and the ANA, Afghan National Army, folded a lot more precipitously than just about anybody anticipated. But it's whether you're a reporter in a war zone or an individual, you don't want to be the last one out, because inevitably what happens is what we're seeing here, and that's the doors close faster than you can imagine.
I heard a soldier the other day say that he was struggling with purpose. That for all of those, the fight that they, Canadians and NATO allies fought, they had a mission. I'm extraordinarily proud of what our men and women on the ground did. I witnessed it, I watched it, and they were given very little resource and backup to deal with. Eventually, we got some airlift and all of that. But I'm wondering, and you're working with veterans groups, and I am close as well. When you hear a soldier say, "I'm struggling with purpose," this has profound impact on everything going forward.
Yeah, I have a lot of veteran friends, and they've been very quiet. Been checking in. This has been incredibly painful for all of them. To not be able to help the men who kept them safe, who they bonded with. These interpreters wore uniforms. These were really deep friendships, and to hear the cries of, like, "Where are you? Why can't you help?" is extraordinarily painful, not only for veterans, but for journalists and aid workers and many others who have been going through this. But for veterans in particular, especially ones who have suffered the moral injury of that war. The moral injury got a whole lot deeper this past month, when at the end of the day, we couldn't save that many people, and we couldn't pull them out. And so, there's been a lot of very caring conversations, men and women checking in with each other, making sure you're okay. But this is very, very painful for a lot of Canadians.
I watched and went into some of the schools that our soldiers had built for young girls, learning how to read and write for the first time. So there's been a generation in the last 20 years of these girls that have had access. We talk a lot about gender equality in Canada and democracy and all of that, but we're leaving them there. There will be no schools.
No, there won't be, and there are, like, women judges that we didn't get out. There's women political leaders that we didn't get out. There's a documentary that I'm working on that will be airing on September 10th. That we looked back at some of the reporting from Afghanistan, and after what happened last week, we had to fuzz out all the women that were in our reporting 10 years ago, because we can't be assured that their safety is there anymore. And I was sitting with the editor, and the editor was a refugee from Iran, and it was we were crying through it all. Just, we had to eliminate the identities of these women for their own safety, just in television in Canada even. And so I can't imagine how much fear they face, because you're right, there's an entire generation of women that has grown up understanding that they had more of a voice than they had under the Taliban. And I can't imagine their terror.
What are you thinking? What is the next step for you? You're working on this. You're just going to keep working. You're, as you say, doing this documentary, trying to keep these issues alive and well. I've always been concerned about that. In Canada, we don't have a strong relationship with our military. The bases are off, hidden in other places. We don't see people in uniform walking up and down our streets as you do in other countries, and that we're losing that connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we didn't have a connection, when I was in my 20s and 30s. It was, war was something fought by previous generations, covered by previous generations of journalists. Occasionally, you get parroted into the Falklands, or I'd get parroted into Iraq, but it was a very short period of time. But there is now a generation of war correspondents in Canada. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know quite what happens at this point. It's going to be very difficult for the Canadian military, where it's deployed in the future, to get local staff in hot zones who are going to, wonder, well, why would I work for you if this is what happened in Afghanistan? I think that's going to be something they're going to have to deal with. And as far as for Canadian soldiers, I think there's a whole lot of very sad feelings, and they're having to do a lot of work on themselves to not sink deeper into depression if they're already in it.
Yeah, for sure. Where's the documentary air?
It's on Global, my old station from a while
ago. Your old network, yeah.
It runs on September 10th, Friday at 10 p.m. And it's a look back at 20 years of disruption and how, that newscast, Global National, was born the week of 9/11 and for 20 years just ended up covering, wars, climate change, just massive levels of disruption that have been part of a conversation for 2 decades. And
it's hard. I mean, I went to New York after 9/11, and it's hard to even get people to respond. I mean, the government has said they're not, in this country, have said they're not really marking the 20th anniversary of 9/11. They're going to wait for the 25th, as if we were talking about, a wedding's anniversary celebration. Like, this is...
Well, and it turns out that, like, the bookend on that 20 years was this month.
Exactly.
It is 20 years to the day that the series of events that were sparked by that awful attack on Manhattan and the Pentagon, the final chapter was written last week, and it wasn't a pretty one.
No, it wasn't. Kevin, thanks so much for everything that you're doing, for really taking this one on, and keep writing about it, because, you're good at it, and people need to know. They need to know some of the gory details. I hate to put it that way, but maybe that's the only thing that will shock us into action and reality.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I mean, I wouldn't have written anything if there had been Canadian reporters witnessing this, but I mean, one of the aspects of our modern media world is that there were no Canadian reporters covering this massive story that involved Canada, and they couldn't get in once it got bad. So I was trying to write through secondhand information that I was receiving, because it was the only on-the-ground reporting that existed for a little while. And so I felt compelled to provide the narrative of these people that, in a different era, reporters would have been there to capture. But when they weren't, I felt that they needed their voices to be heard.
We're just old school, Kev. That's it.
I know. Just old, maybe.
Yeah, maybe just old. Kevin Newman, who's reported on all Canadian networks and for ABC in the States, and of course is working now as a volunteer with the Veterans Transition Network. So anything you can do to help that group, if you feel like sending funds or whatever, that would be wonderful. So take a look at the work, take a look at that website. And Kevin, thanks very much. We'll see you soon.
Really nice talking to you again, Pam. Take care.
Yeah, great. Bye-bye.